The next morning, the group awoke slowly. Cullen went down first and found Harolf sitting alone at a table, looking tired. The young man asked Harolf if he also had nightmares, and they talked briefly about Cullen's nightmares, and how realistic they seemed to him. Asteria joined the group next, lost in thought for a moment. She remembered the seer's mention of following the wolf, and informed the group that she wanted to go near the dock where she had last seen him. The person she was looking for would probably be there. Helga and Sari made their way to the table shortly after, and they agreed to go to the blacksmith first, where Sari might be able to get some information on the war clan. They left the tavern and made their way there. A variety of mundane shops lined the area, selling everything from weapons and armor to food. A few stalls had large fish hanging from the rafters. One even had a giant bat splayed between the beams. The merchants did not seem to be clamoring for attention. These were not luxury shops, but simply suppliers of goods necessary for survival. They doubted there were any deals to be made here. Sari called out to ask who was selling equipment to the war clan, and while everyone around her looked at the tiefling skeptically, they all ignored her. Finally, she saw where the blacksmith was and entered the shop. A tall folk was working there and greeted the group. She immediately asked about the war clan, and he claimed to have no idea what Sari was talking about. They could all sense that he was not being completely honest. Helga tried to intimidate him by sharpening her axe, and was offended when he offered to trade her for a new one. She said she had had her weapon for decades and was perfectly happy with it. The tall folk then turned to Cullen and asked if he wanted a new pike. The young man grabbed one of the blacksmith's pikes to test it and broke it in half. The tall folk was offended and at first asked him to pay, but when everyone began to question the quality of the weapons in the shop and threatened to spread the rumor about the poor quality, the blacksmith gave up and shared information about the war clan. He confirmed that they had visited him a few weeks ago with a strange emblem that he had never seen before. He could not tell much more, as he said they mostly stayed on their ship. After the conversation, Asteria traded for a better leather armor, a ruby and the bejeweled horn, and extra daggers for Sari. Sari also asked for a hand crossbow and some bolts to train Sidi. Then they left the blacksmith and crossed the river back to the docks. Like the day before, a male elf was shouting orders. Helga approached him and noticed that he had only one arm. She inquired about buying a ship, and the elf, whose name was Silorfin, pointed in the direction of the shipyard. She then asked him about the war clan, and he confirmed that he had seen them, and that a man named Gully was there. According to the elf, Gully had a settlement nearby in the north of nowhere, but he did not know the exact location. Asteria recognized the name and told Sari that she could give more information about him. Gully was the brother of Jarl Athil. Asteria also asked Silorfin about his knowledge of the Bayendur kingdoms, and he recommended asking the captain of the Raven ship, a man named Had. He added that this captain was in debt and owed him money. After asking all the necessary questions, the group decided to split up. Asteria and Sari stayed with Harolf and Sidi near the docks to learn more about the kingdom of Bayendur, while Helga and Cullen went to visit the shrine. While Asteria and Sari found no one who could help them, they heard a rumor about one of the kings of Bayendur, King Senrik. According to the raiders they talked to, Senrik had captured a Valkyrie and was keeping her in a cage in his castle. Meanwhile, Helga and Cullen made it to the Great Hall. Thick logs had been hewn many generations ago to form a simple square structure that stood in the center of a courtyard. A wooden wall surrounded the area, though the gate was currently open, revealing a platform with a body on it in the courtyard beyond. The body of a female dragonborn had been hanging for what seemed like several days, and were it not for the cold weather, the stench of a decomposing corpse would have filled the air. Both of her hands had also been severed. Cullen asked a guard what had happened to the poor soul, and was informed that the dragonborn had been caught stealing several times, and they decided to make an example of her to discourage people from stealing. As the young man turned to leave, he noticed that the guard behind the door was guarding 2 holding cells, one of which contained a man. When he asked about him, the guard explained that the man was a drunk who belonged to the Grey Crew. Helga went straight to the shrine to say a prayer to Alden. As she finished her prayer, one of the 2 priests present at the shrine, a human, approached her and noticed that she was praying to Alden and had not seen Helga before. They talked about Alden's wisdom and faith in general. Cullen joined them shortly after and also prayed to Aldhene, offering the few white raven feathers he had collected as the goddess guided him, and thanking her for all her help. He then placed a gold coin in Vani's shrine as a token of his gratitude. The priest turned to the young man and asked if he knew the story of Vani wrestling a dragon. At the same time, Sari and Asteria offered CD the hand crossbow and promised to teach her how to defend herself. The little girl was very happy about it and inspected the weapon as if it were a new toy. They then agreed to regroup with their other companions at the shrine. Sari, who had a flair for selling, offered to take the guard's fingernails for a few coins. The guard looked confused and was not convinced. But when Sari offered to pay him to talk to the prisoner, the guard agreed, and Asteria joined him to interrogate him. Thanks to his silver tongue, Sari came up with a convincing story about the prisoner named Delrock. She said that the guards wanted to cut off his hands, but if he gave them his toe and fingernails, they would take them as compensation. The man finally agreed and had Sari cut all his nails. While this was going on, Asteria asked Delrock if he knew of the Bandur kingdoms. The drunkard recommended speaking to his captain, Scudi. Meanwhile, in the shrine, she tried to teach Sidi about all the gods, but seeing that the child was bored and more focused on her new hand crossbow, she finally gave up and prayed to all the gods. After that, the group went to the shipyard, except for Sari, who wanted to sell the nails to Agil quickly and make a profit. She found the other tiefling where she had been the day before and made her happy by giving her the nails. She gave him a few coins in return, whispered something while looking at the flames, and threw the nails into the fire. Meanwhile, at the shipyard, the group met with Perron, and Helga asked about the price of a new ship. He recommended an explorer longship with a starting price of 6,500 gold pieces. Perron also talked about Scudi, telling the group a rumor that his mother had died, and that he was worried about his father, who lived on a farm nearby. He also spoke of Belton, a man who paid half the price for a ship, and never returned to get his ship and pay the other half. While the conversation was going on, a female half-orc approached Perron and kissed him. He introduced her as Garsh, his wife. Sari joined them shortly after, and they returned to the Eye of the Storm. On the way, they filled the tiefling in on their conversation at the shipyard, and Asteria told him what she knew of Gully. She remembered that he had once set out to find new outposts, and she remembered him as a cruel man. Herolf trembled with rage and made a blood vow to kill Gully, convinced that Gully was behind the attack on the Tower of Kekel. Siri joined him in the blood vow and swore to kill members of the war clan. Asteria remained silent, but was saddened that most of the war clan were so different from the people she knew and loved. At the tavern, Helga asked Zelan about the various captains they had heard of and about Belton, the man who had paid for half a ship. The bartender pointed to a table and said they were Scudi's men. She said she also knew where Had was, but would not cooperate without a reward. Asteria joined the old woman and slipped her gold pieces to refresh her memory. She told them of another tavern called the Raid Leaders' Hall, and gave them directions. The group immediately set out to find this other tavern and saw the door Zelan had described. A set of rickety steps led up the back wall of one of the taller buildings in town. It seemed unlikely that there was anything of importance behind the black-painted door at the top. After knocking on the door, they soon realized that they would have to find a password to enter. They returned to the Eye of the Storm, and Asteria shared more gold with Zelan to learn the password. They had to say, "The great raven that flees above." They returned to the other tavern, knocked, said the password, and the door opened. The long hallway behind the door was lit by torches in sconces along the hall. There was no sign of the person who opened the door for them, and the hallway ended at a T. They could go left or right. A variety of colored smoke poured through the gaps between the wooden wall panels, giving the tunnel a hazy and surreal feel. The group went left first and opened the door at the end of the corridor, but teleported right back to the entrance. Confused at first about what had happened, they repeated the password to enter and turn right, Helga going first, full of determination. There was another door, but this time when she opened it, it revealed a tavern. All conversation ceased as the group entered. 8 round tables were scattered around the modest room. Each table had once been a raider's shield, but had been varnished and polished to a shine. A brazier of colored smoke sat on each table, surrounded by keen-eyed men and women. They stared at the group for a moment, before resuming their whispered conversations. One table was empty, and another had only a single occupant. The others joined the old woman and sat down at the table where only one man sat. He introduced himself as Rufus. Asteria was very surprised when he began to smell her, and from her scent he could tell that she was from the Baendur kingdoms. The group started talking to Rufus. He shared a lot of information with them. When Sari talked about the nails and coins he got from Egil, Rufus told them that she used to be a captain, but the crew did not want her as captain after she started having her visions. The group explained that they needed a ship, and were looking for information on the captains currently in nowhere. At some point during the conversation, a wicker approached and pointed to a paper with the available drinks. The group ordered drinks, and the wicker just nodded and left. Rufus explained that he was mute. Helga, always to the point, inquired about Scooty. Rufus pointed to a table and said she would find him there. The old woman immediately left the table to talk to Scooty. The rest of the group returned to casual conversation. Chulin spoke of their journey to nowhere and how the dead had come back to life. As the conversation continued, they found out that Rufus was a merchant, and Asteria and Sari were trading some valuables they had found on their journey to the elf. Asteria also showed him her knife with her family's insignia on the handle. He examined it and said he believed it came from the northern part of Baendur. He told stories of raiders and their raids in Baendur, but when Asteria looked down with a sad expression on her face, Rufus changed the subject. He picked up a scroll and said that he had received this treasure map from Egil. Meanwhile, Helga asked to speak to Scooty. There was a moment of silence, and a man asked what she wanted. She explained that she wanted to join a crew. The man told her to go away, but the woman took an imposing posture and said she was more capable than they thought, and that the legendary Hrolf would also join. They all laughed, and another man revealed that he was the real Scooty. He did not believe Helga, who gave up and went back to tell the others. When she returned to the table, she asked about the treasure map they were talking about and refused to buy it for the price Rufus was offering. She tried to intimidate him, and he finally agreed to lower his price. She asked for another captain, and the merchant laughed and said she was going straight for business too. He pointed to another table and said she would find lurks there. He explained that she was the captain of the ship of Vipers. He described her as hot-tempered but caring. He had heard rumors about her that she had raided an outpost and was currently taking care of it. The rumor was that she had found love there. Helga thanked Rufus and rose to meet the next captain. The rest of the group continued to talk about the treasure map, and Asteria exchanged it for a ruby. They opened it and saw the map of Grimnir with 2 islands indicating where the treasures would be. These 2 islands were on the way to Falagur, where Helga had to go anyway.